Okay, so to Hilary Gemara. We are up to the new parak, Yediyas HaTorah. So if you remember, all the way at the beginning of Masechta, the Gemara asks, why are we now starting to elaborate on Tumah v'Tahira, on Kachim? Aren't we in the Masechta of Shavuos? So the Gemara said, there's just a couple of small details that we need to get out of the way to understand the Kachim, and then we'll get into the meat of Shavuos. So we're still in the middle of those two small details. So we did the first parak, and now we're going to do the second parak. Zok Heilige Mishnah, Yediyas HaTumah Shtayim Shein Arba, which is really the way the first Mishnah in the Masechta started off, and we already learned what Shtayim Shein Arba means. So we learned that there's forgetting, knowing there's a Yediyah B'Tchila, knowing that you're Tameh, or the way Rabbi learned at the end is knowing that there's such a thing as Tumah that you learned from Cheder, and then forgetting that you're a Tameh and going either into the base Hamikdash or eating Kachim, and then you remember that you're a Tameh. So Nitma, he became Tameh, V'yada, and he knew about it. And then V'nelma Mimenu HaTamah, and then he forgot that he became Tameh. But V'zachar as a Kodesh, he was aware that he was eating Kachim. Or Nela Mimenu HaKodesh, he didn't realize that he was eating meat of Kachim. V'zachar as a Tumah, but he knew that he was Tumah. Or Nelma Mimenu Zeviza, he forgot that he was Tameh, and he didn't realize that he was eating Kachim. V'achal as a Kodesh, and he ate Kachim. V'lo Yada, and he was not aware. Umisha Achal Yada, and then after he ate, it became known to him that he ate Kachim the Tumah. Hareza ba'oil v'yored, that brings an oil v'yored. So really, this is the same Mishnah that we learned in the first parak. The only case that's added is if there's a halama of both the Tumah and the Kodesh, it has the same halacha, hareza the oil v'yored. Nitma v'yoda. What if he became Tumah and he knew about it? V'nelma mimenu Tumah, and he forgot that he was Tumah, v'zachar Hamikdash, but he was aware that he was walking into the base of Hamikdash. So the first set of cases we learned was Tumah's Kedosha, meaning he ate Kachim. Now we're talking about the Aveira of coming into the base of Hamikdash when one is Tameh, or Nela Mimen Hamikdash, or he didn't realize that this place was the Makam Hamikdash, v'zachar Tumah, and he was always aware that he was Tameh, or Nela Mimenu Zeviza, or he forgot that he was Tameh, and he was unaware that this was the base of Hamikdash. And Nichnas LaMikdash, he went in V'lo Yada, and he was unaware at the time, and then Umishiyat Yada, and then subsequently it became known to him that he was in the base of Mikdash. But Tomasai, Hareza Ba'il V'Yerid, once again, he brings an Eil V'Yerid, the idea B'Tchila, idea B'Soif, he brings an Eil V'Yerid. Echad HaNichnas LaZorah. Say if you walk into the Azara proper, which is the base of Mikdash, Ve'echad HaNichnas L'Tois V'Sa'azara. Or if you walk into an area that was not originally part of the Azara, but was subsequently added on to the Azara, that would be considered coming into the Beis HaMikdash. Now, Rashi says, why is the add-on Kodesh? It's not part of the original perimeter of the Azara. They don't just willy-nilly say, now there's a bigger Azara. There's a whole process that has to be done which gives it a proper kedusha of the Azara. And the Mishnah mentions this whole list of things briefly, which the Gemara is going to elaborate on. So the way it's done is b'melech. You need to have the king there. And Rashi says there's psukim that teach us why you need all these, or that you need all these things. B'melech, there has to be a novi involved. The Urim V'Tumim has to be involved. This Sanhedrin Shel Shivim V'Echad has to be involved. Ubishtei Toidos, they bring two Toidos, which Rashi tells us that the Gemara is shortly going to tell us that it doesn't mean they bring a carbon Toida, they bring two Lachme Toida. And Rashi says, they would walk around the area that they're being Mekadesh to add to the base of Mikdash. They would walk around the area with these two Lachme Toida. Uvashir, they have to have a whole band that has to be a musical ceremony. Uvezdin Mahalchin, and Bezdin walk Ushtei toidos acharein, and the two toidos are carried behind them. V'chol Yisrael acharein, and all of Klal Yisrael come. So this was a major. It was like a major Achnas Sefer Torah, a major Chanukas Habayis. It was a major ceremony that they did to give the Azara Kedusha if they wanted to add on to the Azara. Okay, Gavaltik. Let's turn on to the base. Hapnimis Nachelas. The inner one is eaten. The Hachitzoina Nisrefes, and the outer one is burnt. Rashi says, Mefarish b'Gemara, the Gemara is going to explain later on what it means. The Chol Shaloi Nasis b'Chol Elu, and if they added onto the Azara and they didn't make the proper ceremony, Hanichnis L'Sham Ein Chayav Aleh, because it's not legitimate as part of the Azara, it doesn't have that extra Kedusha. Only if all these processes were done, only then does the Azara, the add-on to the Azara, get its Kedusha. Zok Tehillah Mishnah weiter. Nitma ba'Azara. What if somebody was in the Azara and he became Tameh? And Rashi says, V'yada shenitma. He was aware that he became Tameh. And then the Nelma mimenu Tuma, and then he forgot suddenly that he was Tameh. V'zocher es hamikdash. But he was aware the whole time that he was in the Beis Hamikdash. Or Nelam Heimenu Mikdash, or he forgot that he was in the Beis Hamikdash. V'zocher es hatuma, but he was aware of the fact that he was Tameh. Or Nelam Mimenu Zeh Vizeh. And now, if someone becomes Tameh in the Beis Hamikdash, if he makes a beeline and gets right out without a delay, he wasn't violating any issue. It's only if either his shtachaveh, before he left, after being Tameh, he bowed down. So there was a delay for the amount of time that it takes to bow down, because that's what he did, he bowed down. Or even if he didn't bow down, he just delayed leaving the Azara immediately. And how long did he delay? A couple of seconds, the amount of time that it would take to do a hishtachava. Or he didn't make a beeline. He didn't go straight out. He actually took the long way out. So then chayiv. That's mechayiv somebody, as Rashi says, if he didn't take the shortest route out, then it's chayiv afilu loy shatchila. Even if he didn't delay, even if he immediately left when he became aware that he was tamei, but he didn't take the shortest route out of the Azara, he will be chayiv. Rashi says, "V'shiurin alalu halacha l'Moshe Mesinahem." These shiurim, as to how fast you got to get out, are halacha l'Moshe Mesinai. The misha nitma b'toich hazara. It's halacha l'Moshe Mesinai said in regards to somebody who became tamei while he was in the Azara. Biktsara, but if he took the shortest route out, potter, and again Rashi says, "Heichad lo yishtachav v'lo yishah." That's if he didn't delay. The moment he found out he was tamei, he made a beeline for the closest exit. Zuhi mitzvahs asay shebemikdash she'ein chayav v'nola. This case of someone who became tamei while he was in the Azara, he's not over Eloisha. He didn't come into the Azara when he was tamei. It's a mitzvah to say for him to get out as quickly as possible. That's a mitzvah to say shebemikdash she'ein chayav v'nola, that you're not going to be chayiv. Now Rashi says, what are we referring to when we say the mitzvah to say? So Rashi says it's referring to the shalchu min hamachane v'chol tamei l'nefesh. So the Torah gives a mitzvah to say to send somebody out of the machane shchina when he's tamei. So that's the asay. But it's an asay that ein chayav v'nola. Ein chayav v'nola what? Zok to Rashi. Bezdin par b'hayra v'loy koyin Mashiach. Meaning, if Bezdin wrongfully was matir someone to stay in when he was tamei, normally if Bezdin is wrongfully matir somebody to go into the Beis Hamikdash when he's tamei, they have to bring a par, but for not leaving, there is no chiyuv to bring a par, or if it's a kohen who is over, he doesn't have to bring a par kohen Mashiach. However, in a similar case, the Ezohi mitzvah sasei shebenida shechayavin aleh, not by kachim, but by chulin. Where do you find a mitzvah sasei that one is chayiv for? And what's this doing here? Zok Rashi, the Ezeh mitzvah say Shabbanida. I did the ton of Baharios. Since it says in Harios, Ein Chayavin Allah say Shabbat you're not chayav any carbon when it's an Isser say in the Beis Hamikdash, which is what we're talking about. The Isser of Ishach Min Amachaneh. Avol Chayavin Allah say Shabbanida. But you would be mechuyev on a mitzvah say that's not b'mikdash, that's relevant to Hilchos Nida. Katani, we learned here. Ezai mitzvah say Shabbat the Ezai Shabbanida, and that's why our mission decides to tell us an example of Kodesh where there's no Chiyuv versus an example of Nida where there is a Chiyuv. So what was the case? Someone's in the middle of a Biyah and in the middle of the Biyah she told him that I was Pirs Nida and now there's a Chiyuv Kares on me. Upirish Miyad, if he pulls out right away, Chayiv, he will be Chayiv. Why? Because pulling out in an aroused state is hana, just like the bia, and therefore there'd be a chiyuv for it. Let's have a look at Rashi. It's also similar to the case of asay in the mikdash, where something happened to you while you were already inside. He came in beheter, and inside he found out that he was tamei, or that she was tamei in the case of nida. And he pulled out still while he had an erection. Chayiv, he'll be chayiv. So what is he supposed to do? He has to stop moving until he loses his erection, and then the yifresh beloy koishi, and therefore he won't be over. So that's why there's an say, because there's nothing that he's not supposed to do. There's something that he has to do. He's got to stop, freeze, pause, wait, and then pull out. The Gemara is going to explain where we know these halachas from. Now, this, believe it or not, is a pretty complicated sugya of yitziyasei halnola kibiyasei. There's a big machlokes. Is if it's still a bia, even though it's a yitziyah, and that is the question: is the yitziyah considered a bia? So the Pashup shot is the Isser must be the Hana, not, and that's what defines what a Bia is. Why? Because if it says the Yitziyasa Hanala Kibiyasa, and you'd have a Chiyuv for being Boyal Anida through the Yitziyah, so that tells you that the Yitziyah is a Bia. There are those who learn that the Isser of Bia is Hana. So if you don't have a Na, there was no Bia. Or it could be it's a Bia, but it's a Bia with Arana. So there's a lot of shilas in the lumdus, believe it or not. Even in such an issue that's uncomfortable to discuss, there's actually a whole shows in lumdus how it works. Is the bia the isser? Is the another isser? Because we know there's such a thing of misasik the yarayis who bechalovim is chayiv shekein nehena. The law is normally if you're misasik in an aveir, meaning you do an aveir without any intent whatsoever, there's no chiyuv for it. There's no chiyuv. I'll show you. It's called misasik. You didn't do it at all. But if someone is misasik b'bia, I mean, I'm not sure exactly how that would occur. And I don't know. He has an erection. He falls off a porch and he lands on somebody. And it'll be a crazy type of case. But there you're chayav achatos. Why? Shekei nehena. So there are those who learn the bia is the bia. Since you add another, there'll be a chiyuv. There are others who don't know. The nehena means that there's a bia. It's the hana that's the bia. There's a lot of lumps about it. Let's focus on other lumps for now. Hasheretz. What happens if Zakrashi, if he touched the sheretz, the nelam mimenu, and he forgot about it? Al helam sheretz chayiv, the einay chayiv al helam mikdash. So let's have a look. So Rabbi Eliezer argues on our understanding. Our understanding is either forgetting that you were tummy or forgetting that you were in the base of mikdash are both considered a lama for which you can be chayiv. And the Rabbi Eliezer argues on that premise. Hasheretz v'nelam, oy benivlas sheretz tamei v'nelam imenu. So that's what the Mishnah means. Hasheretz means, or if it was in the case where the tumah originated from a sheretz touching you, and v'nelam imenu, so then in such a case, al helam sheretz chayiv. If you forgot that you're tamei, that's when there'll be a chayiv tumas oil v'yared. But ve'eni chayiv al helam mikdash. But you will not be chayiv if you forgot that you were in the base of mikdash. Arguing on the Tanakh of the Mishnah. Rabbi Kiva seems to say something that's exactly the same as Rabbi Eliezer. Rabbi Kiva Omer, v'nela mimenu v'hu tamei al helam tuma chayiv. You only chayiv in oil area if you forgot that you were tamei, but ve'eni chayiv al helam mikdash. But you wouldn't be chayiv if you forgot that you were in the base of mikdash. It seems to be the same thing as Rabbi Eliezer. The Gemara is going to have to show us the difference between them. And Rabbi Shmuel Omer, the third shita, is it says v'nelam shtei pa'amim l'chayiv al helam tuma val helam mikdash. Now these two v'nelams are in two consecutive psukim. We actually learned this limud already, Rabbi Shmuel, but we'll read it again. It says oynefesh asher tiga b'chol davar tamei oy benivlas chay tameya oy benivlas behema tameya oy benivlas sheret tamei v'nelam imenu. So this is the first nelam v'utamei v'ashem. And again, so there's two alamos who want to tell us that the alama of the Tumah triggers the Chiyuv Oil B'Yored, and the other, the Nelam, tells us that if you forgot that you were in the Makam Mikdash, that will also trigger a Chiyuv Oil B'Yored. I don't know. The Gemara is going to tell us. Rashi says, "The Gemara mafarish b'may b'nai." Amar, and don't worry, not that I know the answer already and I'm holding your suspense. I don't know it, but I'm trusting Rashi that the Gemara is going to explain. Amar Papa Labai, Shtayim Shein Arba. Why are you saying that it's two examples that work out to four? It's actually Shtayim Shein Sheish Havyon. There's actually six scenarios. Why? There's Yediyas Hatuma. So we're talking about the Yediyas, discoveries after you didn't know something. So there's six discoveries. There's Yediyas Hatuma Tchila V'Soif. So you knew that you were Tamei originally, you forgot, and then you found out again that you were Tamei. So that is already two. Yediyas HaKodesh Tchila V'Soif. Then there's Yediyas HaKodesh Tchila V'Soif, knowing and forgetting that you were in the base of Mikdash, you were eating kachim, and then there's Yediyas Mikdash Tchila V'Soif. So it's actually six Yediyas, because there's six things that you remember, you could remember twice, either the Tumah or the Mikdash or the Kodesh. If you're going to get so granular into the Yediyos, well then Tamna happen. It actually works out to 8 Yediyos. Why? The Ika Tumah the Kodesh, the Tumah the Mikdash, Tchila V'Soif. So you have 8 cases, because by Tumas Mikdash, you could either have a Yediyah of the Tumah the Tchila V'Soif or a Yediyah of the Mikdash Tchila V'Soif. That's 4. And you have those same 4 cases when it comes to eating kosher. You could have forgotten that you're a Tamei, and then you had a Yediyah of Tchila V'Soif, or you could have forgotten it's the base of Mikdash. So if there's 8 cases, why would Rav Papa ask, why doesn't the Mishnah say 6 cases? Rav Papa, once he's getting granular, should have asked, why didn't the Mishnah say there are 8 cases? Let's see Rashi. I'm sorry, that's on the terrace of the Gemara. So let's see the Gemara right there. Holakasha, that's not fair. The shame Tuma Achasi. When we're talking about Tuma, that it's the same Yediyah V'Soif. So therefore, whether it's the Tuma that you forgot in relation to the Mikdash, or if it's the Tuma that you forgot in relation to the eating the Kodesh, we're not counting those as 2 separate cases. So therefore, it works out only to 6. The truth is, you're right. If you want to get really granular, it's 8 cases. But Arba Kamaisa, the Loy Maisin Layla de carbon, a Yediyah Betchila that doesn't bring him to a carbon, because the sequence is very simple. You knew that you were a Tamei, that's your first Yediyah. Then you forgot that you're a Tamei and you ate Kodesh, right? There's no Chi of carbon yet. The Chi of carbon only comes when you remember once again that you were a Tamei. So the Yediyah Kamaisa is just part of the sequence that has to happen for you to be Chayiv the carbon of the Yored. But the actual trigger happens when you finally discover at the end that you became Tamei. So therefore, our boy Kamaisa later day carbon that don't trigger the carbon, Loy Kachasha. That's not from the Yediyah that the Mishnah is using an account of 4. But our Bo Basraisa, the last 4 Yediyahs, the Maisin later day carbon, will in fact trigger the bringing of the carbon out of the Yored, Kachasha. That's what our Mishnah wants to list. Let's see Rashi. Amar Papa Lo'ilim Tam Nahabi and Barbabas Rashi the Ma'is and the carbon kachashiv. Yediyas Acharaynois, Miyediyas, Moediyas Oisha Shachata. Right? It's the final awareness that he was in the base of Mikdash and he was Tamei. That's what tells him that he did the Avera. And that's why he's going to bring the carbon. Okay, but Arbori Basraisa, I'm just skipping this, the last half of this Rashi. Arbori Basraisa, Yediyah should be safe, but the final Yediyah that he became aware that he was Tamei and he went into the base of Mikdash, that's Isnu B'chol HaTorah, that's everywhere in the Torah, wherever there's a Chiyuv, the Chiyuv comes after you discover that you did an Avera. Like, why would someone bring a carbon chatos if he doesn't know that he did an Avera? He's bliss. Okay. But the Bar Kamaisa, Yediyah Shabbatachila, less Nubachal HaTorah. Sha'oichel Chelav B'shoigig, if someone ate Chelav B'shoigig, Afilu Loi Noidaloi, Achaticha Zu Me'olam, Shei Chelav. Oh, I'm sorry. Let's stop. This is the secondary. So let's hold this for a second. The Ikadamri Amar Papa, there are those who tell us that this is what Papa answered. Lo'ilam Tam Nahavin, really it's 8. Va'arba Kamaisi, the last Nahu, B'chala Tarakula Kachashiv. We're only talking about the first 4 Yediyahs. Why? Because by all the other various of the Torah for which you're bringing a carbon chatos, there doesn't need to be a Yediyah Kamaisa, right? You never had to know that something was chaylev. If you just found out one day that what you ate yesterday was chaylev, you didn't know before that it was chaylev, and you forgot, and then you ate it. Rather, all you need is a Yediyah B'Saif. What's unique about the Parsha of Tumas Mikdash V'Kadosha is that you also need a Yediyah L'Chatchila. So that's what our Mishnah wants to list off and highlight by saying Arba, the way in which Tumas Mikdash V'Kadosha is different from standard Kabbalas. So Nochama, Rabba Kamai the less than B'Chala Terakula. You never find that that's a requirement to bring a carbon chatos anywhere else. Kachashiv. That's what our Tana wants to list. Our Babas Raisa, there isn't B'Chala Terakula, like Kachashiv. In every carbon, you had to find out that you did something wrong after there was a point where you were unaware. So that's not unique to our sugya, so therefore our Tana doesn't highlight that. Let's see Rashi, less Nahu, B'Chala Torah, Sha'aychel Chelav B'Shaygeg, if you ate chelav b'shagig, even if you never ever knew that this meat was chelav, you were totally ignorant of anything to do with the meat. You'll still be chai. But so therefore, the second yediyah is not unique to the parsha of Tumas Mikdash V'Kadosha. The unique yediyah is the yediyah b'tchil. Beautiful. Boy Rav Papa. So Rav Papa now wants to clarify. What would be if it was Nelmo Mimenu Hilchos Tumah? What he forgot was not that this was Tameh or that this was Kodesh. He forgot the Chalal that there's such a concept of an Isser to go into the base of Mikdash when you're Tameh. Ma, what would Allah be? And Rashi explains, Nelmo Mimenu Hilchos Tumah, Kishanoga B'Sheretz, when he touched the Sheretz, V'yoda Shanoga B'Sheretz, and he was aware that he touched the Sheretz. But he didn't realize, he forgot that there's such a thing called tumah. He forgot those halachas. Now, what would halacha be? If you're saying what he didn't know is which species was tamei, so he didn't know that a sheretz is tamei. Rashi says, what type of sheretz looks like a frog that he could make that mistake? I'm not sure what these are. Lizards or some type of. I don't know my creepy crawlies that well, but I think it could be lizards that are doimim tzvardea. The service any matame. Does the article say what these things are? No. Okay. So the loyada isheret tame itzvardea tame. Well, that's not called not knowing. Zil kari beirafu. Any little child knows what's a sheretz and what's not, and what's tummy and what's not tummy. So you don't say that's called not knowing. Because he should have asked. Anybody could have answered him. As Rashi says, Zil Kari Beiravu. Tinogi Shobis Rabban. Kairin, Achaylid, Va'achmer, Va'atov. They know. Any little kid knows. So the fact that you didn't know is not called like a shogeg because you should have known. You ought to have known. Hilchach Einzu Halama. We don't call this Halama. And the Yeshkan Yediyah B'tchila. So that's for sure called Yediyah B'tchila. So if someone didn't know which sheretz is Tameh, if it's a sheretz or it's Frideya, That's not even called alama. That's called the yediyah b'tchila. So surely it does qualify as yediyah b'tchila because he ought to have known. U'chish'achal es hakodesh nelma mimenu negiya rishayna yeshkan yediyah b'tchila. So there would be a yediyah b'tchila because the fact is, even though he didn't know if it's a sardeh or a sheretz, he ought to have known. So that's called a yediyah. Then he forgot when he forgot that he was tamei when he ate kachim, the hel machara, and he forgot about it. And when he finds out at the end that he was tamei when he ate the kachim, or he was tamei when he went to the Beis Hamikdash, he should be chayiv.
He didn't know such a thing.
What do you mean? He forgot that he was tamei.
He didn't know.
But he forgot that he touched the sheretz. No, so the Gemara says he knows there's such a concept of tuma. He just doesn't know that this sheretz would have made him tamei.
So, yeah. So, there's nothing for him to forget. He didn't know. He knew that he touched. But he didn't know that touching.
I hear, but it's called a yediyah. It's called a yediyah. You're making with your eyes, but if you remember, we learned that l'maskana, according to Rebbe, you don't have to know that you're a tamei at the beginning. As long as you were learned in cheder and you once upon a time learned about tumah, that's good enough for the yediyah b'tchila. So the yediyah b'tchila is not the pashup shah. How we learned was yediyah b'tchila means you were fully aware that you were tamei and then you forgot. But that was, according to Rebbe, that was redefined. So they ask when we just learned our Mishnah says quite clearly you forgot that you're a tamei. That's not shot according to Rebbe. According to Rebbe, you could have always known that you're a tamei. You just forgot halacha, right? So you never had to know that you were tamei. You just had to know this halacha. You have to have forgotten that you're a tamei, because then you're amazing. So you have to forget that you're a tamei, but you never had to have known that the Isra Tumah is a problem, because it's called that he knew it's from cheder. So we have to say that he knew that it was talking about tumah sheretz. But what didn't he know that we could say he didn't have a yediyah about? Because it's not so obvious. He touched a dead sheretz that was the size of a nadosha. He didn't know how big of a piece of this sheretz is required for it to contain tumah. So that's a legitimate thing that he might not have known. So that's the shayla. Even the yada de matame sheretz ba'olam, since he was aware that there's such a thing called tumah sheretz, that's called yedihi, and it's enough to be the yediyah b'tchila. Oidilma, even the chadasha lo yada imatame ilai, since he didn't know this detail, maybe it's called halamahi, and therefore we say he never had a yediyah b'tchila, and therefore he wouldn't be able to bring a carbon yarid. And then that thing was just teku. We don't know the answer. We don't know the answer as to what, when you're getting down to the fine tuning, what exactly constitutes a yediyah b'tchila. What does he have to know? How much does he have to know? Boyer Birmir. What about a ben Bavel? Sha'Allah la'eretz Yisrael. Now Rashi tells us it doesn't really matter where he came from. It just means that he wasn't intimately familiar with the borders of the Azara. As Rashi says, everybody anywhere in the world knows that there is a Beis Hamikdash, but he won't know what its exact borders are. So Ben Bavel Sha'alul Eretz Yisrael, and what he didn't know was the exact place of the Beis Hamikdash. Mahu, is that called that he had a Yediyah B'tchila, because he knew that there was a Beis Hamikdash. If you're going to be following Rabbi Kiva, the boy Yediyah B'tchila. And Rashi says, we're going to see where Rabbi Kiva says this later in the parak, but Rabbi Kiva says you need Yediyah B'tchila, which is the classic understanding that we had. You need a Yediyah B'tchila, you need a Yediyah B'sayf, and a Alama in between. So if you learn like the classic way that we've learned is, the problem is, according to Rabbi Kiva, Haloi Mechayiv al Hela Mikdash. Rabbi Kiva told us in the Mishnah that if you forgot that you were in the Beis Hamikdash, that doesn't qualify. You have to forget that you were tamei, right? That's what Rabbi Kiva said, which was the same thing as Rabbi Eliezer. So if you're going to go to Rabbi Kiva, your shaila is a non-shaila. Why? Because Hela Mikdash anyway doesn't trigger a carbon oil of yair. And you're discussing Hela Mikdash, right? If being unaware of the exact borders of the Azara, if that is considered a Hela Mikdash. But according to Rabbi Kiva, it's not relevant because Hela Mikdash is not a factor at all. And the Alibah Rabbi Shmuel, the Mechayiv al Hela Mikdash. But if you're going to learn like Rabbi Shmuel in our Mishnah, it says Alama twice to tell you that Alamas Mikdash also will trigger a Chiyuv of a carbon oil v'yored. But he has another Shita. He holds you never need Yidi B'tchila. So what's the difference if he doesn't know where the Makom HaMikdash was? He holds you don't need Yidi B'tchila. He holds this whole thing Yidi B'tchila is not true. So you're asking a Shaila, but according to which Tana would your Shaila be relevant? So according to Rabbi Kiva, there would be no carbon oil v'yored because you forgot that you were in the Makom HaMikdash. And so according to Rabbi Shmuel, you would be chayav a carbon oil v'yored because you don't need Yidi B'tchila. It's a liba de Rebbe. It's according to Rebbe, who has both shitas. The boy Yediyah B'tchila and Umechayev Ha'al Mikdash. So therefore, and what else did Rebbe say? V'Amar Yediyas Beis Rabbi Shema Yediyah. Remember, Rebbe said all you have to remember is that from Cheder you once learned about the sugya. So who didn't learn about the Azara and the Mishkan in the Parashat Truma and Tzava when he was in Cheder? So our shaila is my. Even the Yada, the Ika Mikdash, Ba'olam, Yedihi, do we consider that a Yediyah B'tchila, the fact that he learned that there was something called the Beis HaMikdash, even though he never knew its exact borders? It's considered a halama, and therefore it's lacking the Yediyah B'tchila, and therefore he wouldn't be able to bring a carbon. Oil of Yaradu, halami, take it. Zok the Heilige Gemara Vayter. Echad Nichlas Azara. So the Gemara, the Mishnah tells us that it doesn't become with the Azara if you add it onto it, unless you add this big ceremony. Minan Amili. There's actually a shayla in the Rishonim. What is the question of Minan Amili? How do you know that you have to do this whole ceremony? Or how do you know that you can bechlal add on to the Azara? But either way, it's taking us to the same place. Amar Absimi Barchia, the Amar Kra, the Pasuk tells us by Parshas Tetzaveh, Kechoylani Mara Oisach, Eis Tavnish Hamishkan, Ves Tavnish Kol Kelov, V'chein Tasu, L'doros. Well, let's see what Rashi tells us. V'chein Tasu is a Kroy Yisrael. The V'chein Tasu in the Pasuk is an extra Pasuk. It already says Kecholash Nimar Oischa, Ves Tavnish Hamishkan, Ves Tavnish Kol Kelov. The Torah is already telling you this is what you're supposed to do to construct a Mishkan. So what's those extra words, V'chein Tasu? Zokt Rashi, it's Lemedrish L'doris, to tell us V'chein Tasu, if any time in the future you wanted to add on to the Azara, you wanted to add on to the Beis HaMikdash, you also have to go through the same process that they went through when they built the Mishkan. When they built the Mishkan, they did all these things. Ukimei Moshe, the Humelech, like in the days of Moshe, Moshe was a king. V'Navi, he was a Navi as well. V'achiv Kohen Gadol, and his brother was a Kohen Gadol. V'urim v'tumim, v'shivim skenim. So in the Bimei Moshe, when they made the Mishkan, they had all these factors. So too, v'chein tasu, any time in the future where you're going to want to add on to the Beis HaMikdash, you have to do it with the same circumstances and pomp and ceremony that they did in the days of Moshe. What the Shonim asked is, when Moshe built the Mishkan, he had not yet set up the Sanhedrin of 71 Zekanim. So they didn't have the Sanhedrin at that time. So the answer is that we learned in Masechah Sanhedrin that Moshe Rabbeinu was shokol connected the whole Sanhedrin. Or when they built the Beis HaMikdash, they didn't have a Kohen Gadol yet. So again, Moshe Rabbeinu was the Kohen Gadol for the Shivus Shmei. So Moshe Rabbeinu was a one-man show. He did everything, but it's still all those individual components that will be required anytime in the future if they want to add on to the Beis HaMikdash. Moshe Rava, Frank Rava Akash. Kol HaKelim she'asa Moshe mishichason mikatshasa. All of the Kelim, the Klei Sharis that Moshe Rabbeinu made, what gave them their kedusha, and their kedusha is what allows it to pass kedusha on. Remember, we said that the flour of the mincha, the oil of the mincha, doesn't become kedusha zaguf until they're in the Klei Sharis. So, what gives the Klei Sharis that strength? Zakta Gemara, it's the Meshicha. They were nimshach with oil. When they were nimshach with Shemin Mishcha, that gave it its kedusha. Mikan ve'elach. But after the days of Moshe, avaydasan mechan chasan. Just using them to do their job is what gives them their kedusha. As Rashi's mekan veilach klei adoros lo nimshachu. They never got smeared with Shem and Mishkan. Ella haschalas avedason mischanason likedusha. Merely using them the first time, that is mekadosh them as a klasharis. The chinuch is a lashon haschala, starting to do the work. Why did it say v'chein tasu l'doros? Doesn't the pasuk of v'chein tasu say whenever you want to add on anything, you have to follow the exact prescription that was done by the Mishkan? If by the Mishkan those kleisharis required Mashiach, so then any time in the future you should need Mashiach in order to make kleisharis. Dr. Mar shiny hasam davar kra vayim shachem vayikadesh oisam. The Torah says that this method of being mekadesh through Mashiach is only for oisam, only for those kelim, the original kelim that Moshe was mekadesh. Oisam b'Mashiach v'loy l'doros b'Mashiach. So that's how we know. Frank the Gemara, all the Oisam tells you is that don't be mekadesh future kelim using the exact same method. But what the method you're supposed to use is up for argument. Ema Oisam b'Mashiach. Those kelim from the first generation, Mashiach alone, Mashiach exclusively will give them the kedusha. But l'doros, maybe you have a choice. Oy b'Mashiach, oy b'avodah. Maybe you could do both ways. How do you see that Mashiach does not work l'doros? Zok Rashi, Ema oisem b'Mashiach v'loy b'avodah. But l'doros you have a choice. Iboy b'Mashiach, iboy b'avodah. Amar Papa, for that we have a pasuk. Amar Kra. Asher Yisharsu Behem B'Kodesh, and the Gemara doesn't quote the full pasuk because there's a double lashon of Kodesh. So let's have a look at what it says in the pasuk itself. It says V'lachu es kol kalei ashares Asher Yisharsu Behem B'Kodesh. That's an extra because it already says it's clear ashares. So we know that they're kelim that you use. So why does the pasuk have to repeat Asher Yisharsu B'Hem B'Kodesh? That's an extra expression. Kala nakasav b'shevis. So you see clearly that what makes them kodesh is the fact that you use them, and not that you have a meshicha, not that you have to shmir it. So Rashi, Talam b'shevis midakafal kra b'lishnei klei asharis Asher Yisharsu. It uses two lashonos of shares. So that's how we know that it's done through that way only and not through Mashiach. So the cause of Rachmana Asher Yisharsu. Now that we have this pasuk that you just quoted, that tells us that in the future the only way to be Mekadesh Kleishares are through using them. So then Oisam Lamali, you told us earlier that from Vayim Shachem Vayikadesh Oisam, we learned that only the original kelim are b'Mashiach, but not the others. I don't need that pasuk anymore because I already know from Asher Yisharsu that future kelim become kodesh through use. So I need both. Ilai kasav rachmana oisam havamina hani hu the b'Mashiach l'doyer the b'Mashiach. Definitely the original generation of karbanos only require one step, and that's Mashiach. But l'doyers, I would have thought the Mashiach ubavoida. Because it says in the pasuk Asher Yisharsu, that's definitely a required step in making them kodesh. But it doesn't say anywhere that there's no other step required. So maybe you still need Mashiach. The akasa v'chein tasu, the ma'aseh v'chein tasu says that all of the processes that are done originally have to continue to be done. So you would have thought that the Torah, when it says Asher Yisharsu, was adding another component of sheirus. You have to use them, but you also need Mashiach. So therefore, midi rachmana oisam b'Mashiach. So we learned a very side in you now that the way to be Mekadesh Kleisharis, the original set was to Mashiach, and in the future when they added on any other kelim, it was Ba'avodah. Mashiach was not required at all. Zok to Gemara weiter. Uvishtei toidos. Tana we learned shtei toidos sha'amru. The two toidos that we're talking about are required as part of the initiation ceremony for a new piece of the Azara. It's belachman. We mean the dafka the lechem of the toida the loib of sarim. We don't actually mean that you're bringing an animal. They didn't carry two animals around when they were walking around this area that they're being mekadesh. It was just the breads. How do we know that? Omar Chisda, the Omar Kra, it says in the pasuk, Va'amida shtei toidos gedolos, and I stood up two great toidos, the sahaluchos liyamin me'alachim, and when they went around the chayma, they went counterclockwise. So liyamin means if you're standing outside the perimeter and you're looking at the chayma, you go to your right. So that will be in the counterclockwise motion. I was once at a shir from Rabbi Reisman in Flatbush. He gives a novi shir, and he even to a whole shir. Why is it that we always dance in a counterclockwise motion? You ever notice when we dance, we always dance counterclockwise? We don't dance clockwise. He said it all comes from the base of Mikdash. When they went around the Mizbeach to the Karnois, everything was always based on the counterclockwise motion. So he shows throughout Novi that when they went around Yericha, it was counterclockwise. Whenever he didn't go around, it's always in the counterclockwise motion.
I believe Chabad dances in the other direction.
Oh, yeah, it was just very revealing.
I believe they do. I'm not sure if there's other Hasidim too.
You dance clockwise?
I'm trying to remember. Ask Mati.
That's counterclockwise. Would you just the motion you made was counterclockwise? Oh, I'm looking for the other side.
If you're standing on the wedding floor, you go this way. No, we don't.
Okay, we'll see tonight. We wanted to find out. Now we know. Now we have a mission for tonight. We'll see how the Bobovers dance, how we dance, how the Lubavitchers dance.
You're right. You're right.
Yeah, when you go around the bima, you're going counterclockwise around the bima. Akiva, we go counterclockwise. It's Chabad that goes It's Chabad that goes clockwise.
Correct.
It could be that Chabad goes clockwise because we do counterclockwise. Now the Makor could be because we do it this way. Okay, so Dr. Gemara, Akiva, in Lubavitch, is there a reason why they go clockwise?
No, I have to remember.
But there's for sure a reason. We've got to figure that out. Because I remember it was a very fascinating shir.
Right.
And that was the only time I ever heard a shir before, and it was like such a fascinating thought. He had to show me had a whole Torah on the direction of how we dance. That's how Klal Yisrael is regulated by Rebbeinu Shalom. Every move, even the direction of the dance. That's right. Amar Chisda, the Amar Kra, V'amida shtei taidos gedolos, v'saluchos liyamin me'alachim. Let's look at the whole pasuk inside. It says over here, this is in Nehemiah, Ve'ela es Surah Yehuda me'alachim. I guess this is when Nehemiah was being Mekadosh Yerushalayim again. Ve'ela Surah Yehuda me'alachim, v'amida shtei taidos gedolos, v'saluchos liyamin me'alachim l'shar ha'ashpos. Rashi says, "V'amidah shtei toidos." Nehemiah Kamar the Sefer Ezra. In Sefer Ezra, Nehemiah was saying, and if you remember, we learned at the end of Sanhedrin, why is it called Sefer Ezra if Nehemiah was doing all the talking? Remember that? So the Gemara, I think, said that Nehemiah took a little bit too much credit for himself, pat himself on the back. So because of that, the Sefer is called Ezra. When they were rebuilding the walls of Yerushalayim, Ubala Kadesh Eshair, and he was coming to be remekadosh the city of Yerushalayim. It says v'amido shtei toidos gedolos etzel achleim mebchutz v'saluchos liyamin me'alachayma, meaning lahagav esair. In what direction did he go around the city? V'saluchos shahalchu derech yamin, in a pattern that was derech yamin, meaning kishepneim lechalal ha'ir. If you're standing outside the city and you're looking towards the city, halchu tamid l'tzad yaminam, they went to their right, ashekivu eskula, which would be counterclockwise. So now let's analyze what about these two toidos? My gedolos. What do you mean big toidos? If you're going to say it's referring to ilema min gadol mamish, to tell you that they didn't use like goats or sheep, they used oxen. So then why use such a language of toidos gedolos? Name a parim. He should have just said amida shtei toidos parim. Why use a descriptive if you could say the word itself? Ella, what it must mean is it must be gedolos b'mina. It must be they were big. They weren't small cows. They were big fat cows. But frankly, Gemara, that's an irrelevant fact because you think HaKadosh Baruch Hu cares how fat your cow is. Me'ika chashivusa kamishmaya. So why would it mention gedolos? Gedolos would mean there's something of a mila to it. There's zero mila to a fat animal. But Tanya, we learned nemar ba'olos behema ishay reich nichayach. It says ba'olos ha'oif ishay reich nichayach, and it even says by a mincha ishay reich nichayach. Malamed teaches us she'echad amarba ve'echad amamit ubilvad she'yechav libo la'avim shebashamayim. The Torah is not impressed with the fat animal, so it doesn't make sense that Nehemiah would have said gedolos. So gedolos cannot be referring to the size of the animal. Elo, you know what it means? It means gedolos shebetoita. It means the largest chalois that are brought along with the carbon toita. Umayni uchametz. Now we know there are 5 types of breads brought. 3 of them were non-chametz, and 2 of them were chametz. But the Gemara is going to illustrate right now in just a moment that they took the full amount of flour that was designated for all of these 50 breads, and they split it in half. And half of the breads, the chametz breads, were made out of half of the flour, and the matzah breads were made out of the other flour. But if there's 30 made with 10 salt or 10 esronim, and there's only 20 made with the other 20 esronim, because there was only 2 chametz breads, naturally the chametz breads are going to be bigger because you're making less with more flour. So that's what it means. Gedolos, it just meant to say that it was the breads that were chametz were the breads that he walked around. So my new chametz. The time we learned hatayda is about min hachamesh soyim Yerushalmiyos shein sheish midbarios. The taida was brought from a certain amount of flour. I won't get into the chamesh and the sheish now because we're already at the end. We'll review this tomorrow, which happens to be shein shtei eifos, which is actually 2 eifos of flour. For the eifos shalosh soyin and the eifos 3 soyin, it worked out to esrim isarin. It was a total of 20 isroinos of flour. Asar l'chametz, 10 of these 20 esronim, half of the flour was designated just to make breads that were chametzdik, the asar l'matzah. And the other 10 esronim were used exclusively to make the 30 breads that were matzah. So you have 10 esronim to make 30 breads of matzah, and you have 10 esronim to make 20 breads of chametz. L'matzah shlosh yaminin. Those are chalosh, rikika, and revucha. So obviously there were the breads of chametz were bigger, and that's how it means that he took breads of chametz when he went around the wall. Okay, we'll stop here, and Bez Hashem, we will be mamshech tomorrow. We'll probably go back over this.